Tiger King's Doc Antle was sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in federal prison.
Today, on Shadows of the Internet, we expose a man who built an empire on the promise of conservation. A self-styled mystic who charmed audiences with baby tigers and grand promises, all while running one of the most elaborate wildlife trafficking operations in modern American history. Behind the Instagram photos and celebrity encounters lay a network of illegal sales, laundered money, and endangered species treated as commodities. And when Netflix's cameras finally turned his way, the world discovered that the man preaching salvation for rare animals was the very threat they needed saving from. This is the story of Doc Antle. Bhagavan Mamavai Antle, better known as Doc Antle, was born Kevin Antle on March 25, 1960 in Salinas, California. But the name Kevin didn't fit the persona he was building. Over the years, he transformed himself into a spiritual figure draped in mysticism, adopting Sanskrit-inspired names and cultivating an image of enlightenment mixed with exotic animal expertise. By the time he established Myrtle Beach Safari in South Carolina, Doc had perfected his brand, a 50-acre wildlife attraction wrapped in the language of conservation, education, and species preservation. He operated under the banner of TIGERS, Tigers, the Institute of Greatly Endangered and Rare Species, and the Rare Species Fund, nonprofits that painted him as a champion for animals on the brink of extinction. Visitors flocked to Myrtle Beach Safari for once-in-a-lifetime experiences, holding baby tigers, swimming with the elephants, posing with lions. The facility charged premium prices for these interactions, sleepovers with exotic animals, private photo sessions, guided tours where guests could get closer to wildlife than any legitimate sanctuary would ever allow. Doc positioned himself as more than just a zoo operator. He was a conservationist, a rescuer, a man devoted to protecting the planet's most vulnerable creatures. He appeared in films, worked with celebrities, and became a fixture in the world of exotic animal exhibition. His social media presence glowed with images of majestic animals and smiling tourists, all reinforcing the narrative that Myrtle Beach Safari was a haven for endangered species. But behind the curated content and spiritual rhetoric, something far darker was unfolding. In 2020, Netflix released Tiger King: Murder, Mayhem, and Madness, a documentary series that exploded into global phenomenon.
I gotta get the hell out of this jail. It's like rabid dogs in a goldfish bowl.
While the show primarily focused on Joe Exotic and Carole Baskin's bitter feud, Doc Antle emerged as a polarizing figure, a man whose operation raised immediate red flags. The documentary painted a troubling picture. Allegations of cult-like control over young female employees, questionable breeding practices, and a business model that seemed more focused on profit than preservation. Former employees came forward with stories of manipulation, exploitation, and a workplace culture built on loyalty to Doc above all else. Netflix followed up in 2021 with Tiger King: The Doc Antle Story, dedicating an entire series to unraveling the man behind Myrtle Beach Safari. The deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became that Doc's conservation claims were a carefully constructed facade. While Doc dismissed the allegations as exaggerated television drama, law enforcement was already building a case that would shatter his public image entirely. Between February and April 2022, federal investigators uncovered a shocking scheme. Doc Antle and his associates were laundering over $500,000 in cash, money they believed to be proceeds from an operation smuggling illegal immigrants across the US-Mexico border. That laundered money was then funneled into purchasing exotic animals. To disguise the illicit funds, Antle wrote checks for fake construction services allegedly tied to his safari operation, masking the true source and purpose of the cash flow. He used his nonprofit status and conservation reputation as cover, falsifying paperwork and disguising wildlife sales as donations to the Rare Species Fund. But the money laundering was only part of the story. Investigators also discovered that Antle had been trafficking in endangered species for years, buying and selling animals in direct violation of the Lacey Act, a federal law designed to protect wildlife from illegal trade. In 2019, Antle purchased a juvenile chimpanzee from Jason Clay. In 2022, he acquired a newborn chimpanzee from Shaylin Cowlick Peterson, who was associated with Florida's Sunshine Zoological Preserve. These weren't rescues, they were transactions, business deals dressed up in the language of conservation. On November 6, 2023, Doc Antle stood before a federal court and pleaded guilty to 2 conspiracies, violating the Lacey Act and money laundering. The man who'd spent decades branding himself as a protector of endangered species had admitted to treating them as merchandise. While the federal case was unfolding, Virginia had its own reckoning with Doc Antle. In June 2023, he was convicted of 2 felony counts of wildlife trafficking and 2 counts of conspiracy related to illegal sale of lion cubs. On October 3, 2023, a Virginia court sentenced him to a 2-year suspended sentence, 5 years of probation, a $10,000 fine, and a 5-year ban on owning or dealing in exotic animals within the state. However, in 2025, a Virginia appeals court overturned 2 of his 4 convictions. The court agreed with Antle's lawyers that while Virginia law prohibited the sale of endangered species, it did not explicitly prohibit purchasing them. The conspiracy charges, however, remained intact, a partial victory for Antle, but one that did little to undo the federal case waiting for him. On July 8, 2025, Doc Antle appeared in a Charleston, South Carolina courtroom before Judge Joseph Dawson III for federal sentencing. The government had pushed for a harsher penalty, arguing that Antle's crimes were particularly egregious given his public position as a conservationist. Prosecutors emphasized that he'd abused the trust of donors, exploited endangered species for profit, and hidden his illegal activities behind nonprofit paperwork designed to evade scrutiny. Antle's defense team argued for leniency, pointing to his decades of work with animals and the logistical nightmare his incarceration would create. Myrtle Beach Safari, they claimed, housed over 150 animals that consumed roughly 1,000 pounds of meat per day. Who would care for them if Doc went to prison? Federal sentencing guidelines suggested a 2-year term, but Judge Dawson opted for a reduced sentence. Doc Antle was sentenced to 12 months and 1 day in federal prison, along with a $55,000 fine, 3 years of supervised release, forfeiture of 3 chimpanzees, over $197,000 in seized assets. During the hearing, Antle acknowledged his wrongdoing. "I made a mistake," he said. "I did a stupid thing." But for many, it wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated operation that spanned years, involved multiple conspirators, and exploited some of the planet's most vulnerable creatures for personal gain. Antle didn't operate alone. Several individuals were implicated in his schemes and faced their own consequences. Jason Clay, who sold Antle a juvenile chimpanzee in 2019, was sentenced to 4 months in prison, 4 months of home confinement, and a $4,000 fine. Andrew Sawyer, involved in the money laundering operation, received probation, home detention, and was forced to forfeit nearly $185,000 and a chimpanzee. Shaylin Cowlick Peterson pleaded guilty to illegally selling a newborn chimpanzee to Antle in 2022 and faced her own legal repercussions. Each conviction added another layer to the portrait of an operation that treated endangered animals as products in a black market economy. Despite the convictions, guilty pleas, and prison sentence, Myrtle Beach Safari remains open by reservation. Doc Antle's online presence persists, and his brand, though tarnished, has not entirely disappeared. His sentencing won't undo the years of trafficking. It won't erase the animals sold, the laws broken, or the trust betrayed. But it does send a message that no amount of branding, mysticism, or celebrity connections can protect those who exploit endangered species for profit. Doc Antle's story stands in stark contrast to genuine conservationists who dedicated their lives to wildlife protection. Steve Irwin, the beloved crocodile hunter who died in 2006, showed the world what authentic passion for animals looked like. Irwin educated millions, funded real conservation projects, and treated every creature with respect, never as a commodity or a photo opportunity for profit. Nearly 2 decades after his death, Irwin is still deeply missed, his legacy living on through his family's continued conservation work at Australia's zoo. He proved that you could be entertaining, accessible, and wildly popular while still putting animals first. Doc Antle's operation was everything Steve Irwin stood against. Doc built his empire on a simple promise, that he was different, that his facility wasn't like the others, that he truly cared about conservation, education, and the survival of endangered species. But the evidence tells a different story. It tells of a man who saw animals as assets, who used nonprofit status as a shield, and who sold the public a fantasy while engaging in the very trade that threatens wildlife worldwide. This has been another episode of Shadows of the Internet. We release new episodes every Wednesday, exploring the stories behind the screens, from viral sensations to the hidden schemes lurking beneath digital fame. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and stay safe out there, Shadowers.